note that says breathe and smile. So I will start with that. Thank you very much for being here today. I'm sorry that I didn't make it all the way to the back to greet each and every one of you. For those who I have not had the chance to meet or greet, my name is Chrissy Houlahan, and I represent our community down in Washington, D.C. And I want to thank you tonight for coming to Phoenixville's Colonial Theatre, and welcome to our third annual State of the Sixth address. Please take a minute, if you haven't already, to greet your neighbors. We are a wonderful community. Perfect. Hi out there. And a few housekeeping items before we begin. I'm going to be on a relatively tight schedule, so I'm going to make sure that I try and keep to about 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes a slide to make sure that I'm at the right pace. But before I start with our few housekeeping, there are exits on either side of the venue. There are restrooms on both floors. The concession stand, we are happy to announce, is open, so please support this, our local treasure, tonight. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, there will be a relatively tight schedule. At 7:05, at 7:03, I'm supposed to be talking to you about the agenda here. We are going to be talking a little bit about meeting norms, and I'll tell you what that means in just a second. We will spend about 40 minutes in a formal conversation that I've prepared, my team is prepared, to give you an update on what's been happening over the last time since we've been together. Then we will turn into a question and answer portion that our mayor, the original mayor, Peter Urscheler, will help us with. And then we will conclude with some remarks as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get going with our meeting norms. For those of you who have been at a meeting with me before, or a town hall with me before, I believe very much that in our community that we very much want to care for one another and treat each other the way we'd like to be treated, with dignity and with respect. And we want very much to be engaged and to be able to listen and to be able to be heard. And to that end, I'm taking a page from a lesson that I learned as a teacher, high school chemistry teacher, of setting norms. And that basically just means how are we going to behave while we're together with one another during the course of this conversation. And here are just a couple of guidelines. One is I just want to make sure that we're treating one another with respect and civility. We are all patriots, we are all Americans, and we all very much love our community, our commonwealth, our country, and our family. And as long as we collectively recognize that, I think we'll be in good shape. We will try to stick to the agenda, that star is for me. Address any conflict by dealing with the issue and not the person. This is about policy, not about people. And we want to make sure that we're discussing policy and not politics here in this very austere setting that we're in right now. Anything that requires further conversation that we aren't able to perhaps get to, we will get back to you. I'll tell you a little bit more about that in the next slide. Let's go ahead to the next slide. In order to try and keep to the schedule that we have, we're going to try to ask for you to write your questions down on the piece of paper that you hopefully have gotten. And if you haven't gotten, go ahead and give a raise of your hand, and one of my awesome team members will get to you. It's a form that just asks you to tell us a little bit about yourself and to ask any questions that you might have. And when Peter gets these at the question and answer portion, he'll try to make sure that we sort them by like topics so that we can ask one question on each subject rather than 12 questions on the same one. Please, please, please don't be like me. Please write legibly so that we can get back to you. Next slide, please. So now we will actually begin with the formal part of our presentation. And so I want to make sure that I speak slowly and smile during this because I really want to make sure you guys understand just how excited that I am, and I hope you guys are, to be back here in this very special place. And it is an evening that is special for so many ways. In normal circumstances, being here in this theater would be special, but tonight is extraordinarily so, and this event is extraordinarily so because it marks more than 2 years since I've been able to address you here in this particular venue, which is the Colonial Theatre. On January 2020, January 23rd to be specific, I stood in front of you on this very stage and was able to deliver our very first State of the Sixth address. And in 2021, we unfortunately were not able to gather in person, but as a result, we were able to do the second State of the Sixth as a virtual event. And thank you for many, many, many of you guys who were able to participate in that. Last year's event was combined with a virtual swearing-in ceremony because I was grateful to be re-elected to serve our community, and I now am able to represent us down in Washington, D.C. for my second term. And this service, as I hope that you all know, it really continues to be an honor of my lifetime, certainly. So here we are. It's April, and it's not January like we had tried, and we would have liked as a team. Many of them are standing in the aisles here. We have, as you probably have, made plans, undone plans, made more plans, changed plans, and continued to try to make this happen. I'm sure all of us have experienced that over the course of the last couple of years. But I am grateful right now to be able to address you here at the Colonial Theatre for that third State of the Union, State of the Sixth address. Some of you may be thinking, why do we do this? And also, frankly, why is it here at this Colonial Theatre? And I will say to you, truly, I cannot think of a better place in our community to have this particular address and meeting. First of all, it's beautiful, and obviously it can contain quite a lot of us here, and it's very historic. Let me go back in time and tell you a little bit about what's happened in this theater. It opened in 1903, and like our country, it has certainly seen its share of good times and bad times. It has survived the stock market crash, the Spanish flu epidemic, the Great Depression, World War I and World War II, the Cold War, the struggle for civil rights, and the housing crisis and market crash of 2008. But this theater has also witnessed the Gilded Age and the golden years of film, the post-war boom of the tech world, and more medical and technological advances than we all perhaps have time to name. It has seen moon launches, space exploration, marriage equality, and the fight for voting rights for all persons. And I'll let you think about that one for a minute, because less than 100 years ago, or actually just about 100 years ago, I literally would not have been able to stand in front of you as your congresswoman. Together, we have been able to accomplish so much over that course of the night since 1903. But as I always say, and I hope you see it on my emails lots, there's a lot of work to be done. And like Phoenixville, and like the Phoenix that it's named after, this time in our history is a real time for rejuvenation. It's a time for new pathways and new purposes, a time to find the very best in one another and to work to achieve our great promise and our great collective spirit. It's a time for determination and drive that delivers the shiny hill on the city on the hill that we all think about and we all want to reside on its shores. So this is a great experiment in democracy, and it can be somewhat of a messy process, and you probably will hear that throughout the presentation. In the 3 or so years that I have been honored to serve in this office, my experience has been that there really is no such thing as perfect circumstances. There are no perfect pieces of legislation. There are no perfect outcomes. The philosopher Voltaire once famously said, or at least we think he did, "The pursuit of perfection is the enemy of the good." And this is in fact something that I say to my team quite frequently. Voltaire never served in Congress, but he definitely got that one right. So Congress is definitely not perfect, as you probably follow in the news. And democracy is very, very messy. But I promise you that each and every day that I rise with a primary purpose to authentically represent our community and to honorably serve this great nation. So with that in mind, I stand before you tonight to start our conversation and to proudly say that the state of the 6th Congressional District of Pennsylvania is good. And with that, I would love for us to applaud ourselves. As we get into this, I know many of you are very familiar with this map, but just to give you some perspective on where we are right now, we are in the upper map right now. And the upper map is the 6th Congressional District. We are sitting in Phoenixville, in the county of Chester County, And the 6th Congressional District also has the lower portion of Berks County. As you probably saw in your slideshow, it's about 700,000 people. It's really remarkable, and I share this down in Washington with my colleagues all the time, because it's, roughly speaking, 40% Democrat, 40% Republican, and 20% independent. This is a remarkable district that encompasses the suburban and the rural of our mushroom and dairy farms. I was just with the cows yesterday, all the way up to Reading, the storied city of Reading and the Reading Railroad of the Monopoly Board. This is a unique, constitutional, compact, and contiguous district, the 6th Congressional, and I'm very proud to represent it. On the bottom, you'll see what the new 6th Congressional District is. And so you'll see with that blue arrow the addition of some more of Berks County that has been added. And so we are very fortunate in that most of the district is largely the same. And I'm also grateful for what I think is a very fair district apportionment or reapportionment. Let's go to the next slide. COVID. First, a message from our COVID sponsors. COVID update. In January 2020, we were here for the State of the Sixth address. And in January 2021, as you know, our address was virtual. So we'll pick up where we left off with an update. So let's start with vaccines. Thanks to Operation Warp Speed, and thanks to our research scientists, and thanks to the American Rescue Plan and other federal funding, vaccines are widely available right now, not only here, but around the world. Over 8.6 million Pennsylvanians are considered to be fully vaccinated, and that includes roughly 360,000 people right here in our own Chester County. And what is really remarkable about that is you back up to the overall atmosphere of our world right now and the division that we have along party lines largely. Chester County at one point was leading in vaccinations in the nation. And I think we're still pretty high up there, so that's very remarkable and a testament to how unified we are. Testing. The Biden administration has distributed at this point 1 billion COVID tests, and these tests have been made available to households all over America. Schools are open for in-person instruction, thanks to mitigation, available vaccines for educators and students alike, and a new test-to-stay policy. Our businesses have reopened, and they are looking towards the future, and we'll talk more about that later. Our people are back to work, thanks to widespread availability of vaccines and testing, and our workforce now knows, at least I hope they know, that our health and well-being are a priority for our employers and our community and for our government. Congress and the Biden administration have provided help, and we'll speak a lot about this, in real dollars, in real time, when it was needed the most, through things like a third earned income payment, and through things like a child tax credit. We have certainly come a long way since 2021, but important to this message that I'm delivering today, this is not by chance. In Congress, I and many others have worked to make sure that our community has the resources that we need to accelerate our recovery. And so here is going to be an exercise, I love this, can't wait for this, an overlay of maps of those funds having been put to use in our community. So let's start first by putting on the blue dots, which are funding that came directly from either federal sources directly or through the state government for our firefighters. Let's now layer on that funding that came for our shuttered venue operations grant recipients, of which this theater was one. So live theater, movies, live music, these are represented by those dots, and resources from the federal government came here to help those organizations, those businesses. Let's now layer on Restaurant Revitalization Fund. These are all of the restaurants in Chester County and Berks County that received Restaurant Revitalization Fund money. And that's separate from the PPP that many of you have heard about, which now is being layered on as well. PPP is the Paycheck Protection Program that was federally authorized and funded to be able to protect small businesses, and many of them were able to benefit from that in our community. And now we will layer on COVID relief funds. COVID relief funds were provided for our local governments for the expenses that they have incurred due to COVID. And second to last, we will layer on provider relief funds. Many of our healthcare providers and hospitals had increased expenses or lost revenue And these are the cubes that show you where those resources were sent, again, from the federal government as a result of Congress and our work there. And lastly, EIDL, or the Emergency Disaster Loan recipients. So these are all the people who received those emergency disaster loans. Again, those loans that were provided largely to small businesses to help them buffer themselves from the consequences of COVID. So if you take a look at this and you wonder what your federal government has been doing for you over the last 2 years, this is what we've been at work doing. So as we move on now, I told you I'd get to a little bit more detail to the small businesses and to the economy. Our economy is moving forward. As I talked about PPP loans, they were made available to local businesses, and a total of $2.2 billion were given to our community. I led a successful effort to have those loans that were less than $150,000, forgiven. They were the majority of our loans in our community, and mostly from very small business owners and operators. In our community, $1.2 billion in loans have already been forgiven. This kept our economy going and has helped small business owners across our district to be able to stay in business. I also led an effort to keep our entertainment venues going through the Shuttered Venue Operations Grant. Places like the Reading Fighting Phils, Fox Theaters, and our very own Colonial Theatre were helped by programs like this. And I think we all realized just how much we missed and valued things like baseball and live music, theater, and going to the movies during COVID. Next slide. Our restaurants and local eateries are also some of the best in Pennsylvania, and the Restaurant Revitalization Fund secured us positive futures for many of them by providing them the necessary funds to be able to keep going during very difficult times like this past winter. And I love this quote from one of our local restaurants. It really stood out to me. He said, "To be here as long as we have is only because of the lifeline that was the Restaurant Revitalization Fund." Next slide, please. So while all that was going on, also over the past year, I've been working on our international trade as well, and was honored to host the Ambassador of Japan at Longwood Gardens. I'm also very, very proud to be recognized by the United States Chamber of Commerce with their Abraham Lincoln Leadership for America Award, which recognizes members who demonstrate the bipartisan leadership and constructive governing that is necessary to move our country forward. Now on to jobs. From businesses now to the people who populate them. We know that Chester County and Berks County are awesome places to live and to work. We know that historically we have experienced low unemployment rates and that our economy is very, very strong. And we are, in fact, back to work across this country and across our community. Currently, in this nation, we are experiencing the fastest economic growth in nearly 40 years, and we have created a record 7.9 million jobs. Our unemployment is down to 3.6% nationwide, which is the fastest decrease ever. And interestingly, in Chester County, here where we are, our unemployment rate is 3.1%. So Pennsylvanians are on the job. I believe Berks is roughly speaking around the same, and we are back at work. This is a picture of October where I and our office hosted the Future of Work Job Fair at Westchester University, where more than 100 local and regional employers participated and invited people to learn about opportunities in their businesses. Next slide, please. Also, we were able to host the Secretary of Labor, Mr. Marty Walsh, who visited our community. He was very impressed by the emergency department's expansion at Chester County Hospital and the good paying skilled labor jobs that are available for construction. I was also joined by IBEW, the Union for Electricians, and learned a lot about their apprentice program over the course of the last couple of years, particularly their efforts in bringing on veterans who are apprentices. During this visit, I had the opportunity to catch up with Fred, who's the guy with the mask and over here on the right-hand side, who I had met 2 years ago on a job site at this very same place. He was an apprentice at the time, and now he's a full journeyman. We have room to grow. We have room for more workers. We have tens of thousands of jobs available here in Chester and Berks County. And I'm very encouraged that the Department of Homeland Security and the Department of Labor have expanded capacity for our H-2B visas. This has been an issue since day one in my community here, and I've tried to advocate and vote on behalf of our small business owners, primarily our agricultural and landscaping business owners, who really desperately need reliable workforces to keep their companies growing and their economy growing. And I'll get into this a little bit later as well. Supply chains and inflation, from businesses to jobs to what they make, right? The products and processes that they do. Like many of you, I'm concerned about rising prices and the burden that has placed on everyone, from our students to our seniors. So in response, I did a number of things, and I'm certain we'll talk about this later as well. I co-founded the Congressional Inflation Working Group to address affordability for consumers and businesses. I also held here a constituent town hall about our economic development and talked about concerns that we have about the impact of inflation. As inflation inevitably continues, and we are looking for ways to increase domestic manufacturing, I'm really honored to announce that I have been appointed by our House leadership to serve alongside my colleagues on both sides of the aisle at the Conference Committee for the American Competes Act. Now let's remember our schoolhouse rock here. When a bill passes the House and a bill passes the Senate, it has to be brought together, and we all have to agree on it, and that's what's happening here. I've been involved in this legislation from the beginning, working to secure our supply chains, to promote opportunities in the science and technology fields, and to increase support for American innovation and for manufacturing, so we are less dependent on places like China and Russia. So the conference process will involve combining the Competes Act, which I voted on, with the Senate's United States Innovation and Competition Act, which is referred to as USICA. There's a lot of work to be done to make sure that this legislation addresses the needs of our community, our Commonwealth, and this country, and I look forward very much to bringing the priorities of our community and Pennsylvanians to the table as we work to get this legislation finished and across the finish line for the President's desk for signature. Again, I would encourage you to rewatch Schoolhouse Rock stuff, it's good. And that's what we were talking about with infrastructure, but we are now with supply chains, but we are now going all the way down to how those products and processes get to where they're going and how we get to our jobs. So the next slide is talking about the Infrastructure Jobs Act. In Pennsylvania, we have 3,353 bridges and 7,540 miles of highway in poor condition. Since 2011, our commute times have increased by 7.6% in Pennsylvania, and each year, every driver pays $620 a year due to poor driving road conditions, so tires, alignment, those sorts of things. Our infrastructure is in such poor condition that the American Society of Civil Engineers has given us a grade of C- on its infrastructure report card in Pennsylvania. So last year alone, the United States also faced 22 weather and climate-related disaster events, with losses exceeding $1 billion each year, for each one of those 22 disasters. And a recent study from the National Institute of Building Sciences found that we can save $6 in future disaster costs for every dollar that we spend on mitigation and infrastructure investment. My vote for the Infrastructure and Jobs Act was more than just a singular vote, because it represents a generational investment in our community. And it is a direct response from community members like Hanson Aggregates, who are pictured here, over here, who deliver construction materials to our Mid-Atlantic region. They create the rocks, that create the asphalt that go onto our road. And their good work will be benefiting all of us with safer and more efficient roads and bridges. Next slide. This law also invests in green infrastructure that will play an increasingly important role, gosh, I hope so, in protecting our environment and allowing us to become energy independent. And in this picture, I'm right down the road from here, looking at EV charging stations. You probably recognize some folks there, with Representative Melissa Schusterman, and I don't know if she was able to make it here tonight or not. I don't see her, but I will tell her I gave her a shout out. I'm truly grateful for our partnership, and Phoenixville is certainly well represented by Melissa in the House. And thank you, Melissa, for that help and that assist. And now from all of that into what drives the workers, those who are getting educated. By and large, our pragmatic community really agrees on a lot of things. And one thing is about our kids' education, and that it is fundamentally important. No matter if kids attend a large school or a small school, if they're a young student or an older student, an English language learner or a child with an IEP. These past 2 years have been incredibly challenging for our youth, and we all know that. To be clear, it's also been incredibly challenging for our educators. And thanks to the American Rescue Plans, schools across our district have benefited from something called ESSERs. Our community schools have received more than $200 million in ESSER 3 funds from the federal government, and these funds can be used in a variety of ways, which have allowed us to bring our kids back to school. Extra staff, supplemental education and support services for those who have missed school, summer programs, new technologies for at-home and in-school use, and very importantly, mental health services. Again, these are resources that have been provided by our federal government for our schools to be able to open and be safe. As our students grow, their opportunities do as well, and I'm very excited by the options that our students have here in our community, in our technical high schools, in our community colleges, our four-year degree programs across this district. Just as our students need our help and support, so do our teachers and parents. And so just in this past week, I'm really proud to say that I introduced a piece of legislation that will help simplify student loan forgiveness for people like teachers, for public servants. And I see Kyle in this row, and I want to try and I know I'm not supposed to expand on things, but I'm going to expand on this one. This one's really exciting. This is an existing program to help forgive student debt for people who serve. People, not just in the military, but people who serve us as teachers or first responders or nurses or doctors. If you serve for 10 years, you have the ability to process, to go through for loan forgiveness. 98% of the people who apply for this are denied. This is a broken idea. And so Representative Jim Baird, a Republican from Indiana, and I have collectively introduced this legislation to try to help repair that process so that this process and this program can work for us. I didn't expect this slide. Okay, so this is a topic, speaking of things I can geek out on, this is a topic I could talk all day about. Some of you know that I'm an engineer, and I once wanted to be an astronaut, and Sally Ride was my childhood hero. And I very much am passionate about working to make sure that we can expand STEM and STEAM access in education and vocational opportunities for all of us, no matter what our gender, no matter what our background is. And so just 2 weeks ago, this bill, which is a mouthful, the Mathematical and Statistical Modeling Education Act of mine, passed out of the House Science and Space Committee with unanimous bipartisan support. Yay! So if you remember your Schoolhouse Rock, now it goes to the floor for a general vote. Next stop, the House floor for a vote. So this is, as the demand for statistical modeling continues to grow across all of our industries, and I could geek out with you on this all day, this is an investment to make sure that the next generation is well equipped for our future job markets and has the skills they need. I'm doing a time check now. It's supposed to be 7:25. I'm 5 minutes behind. All right, I'll talk faster. My office and I have participated in a lot of different STEM events during our time in office, but here are two of my favorite events with NASA astronaut Victor Glover and Megan MacArthur. Commander Glover sent our community a special message from the International Space Station during Black History Month and Engineers Week, and Flight Engineer MacArthur led our students through a live town hall from space. So here are the students who submitted questions, cuties, huh? And had them answered from the space station live, which was very, very cool. I also founded something called the Women in STEM Caucus and introduced a piece of legislation called the STEM Restart Act. This is a national program that, if enacted into law, would support mid-career workers who are in STEM fields, particularly from underrepresented and rural populations. So this is trying to encourage a mid-career person to go back into the workforce, a returnship, so to speak, We lose a lot of us for different reasons in the middle of our career. It's important to bring us back into the fold. Next slide. Talking faster. We're going to now talk about healthcare. And when I first was running for office, healthcare, as I would say to any reporter who would ask, was issue number 1, number 2, or number 3. And today, it's really no different. The concerns are still existing, but of course the landscape has changed pretty significantly with the pandemic. But what I can say is thanks to the Affordable Care Act, 30 million Americans have access to health care, and we should all be enormously happy and supportive of that act that passed during the prior administration, the Obama administration. But importantly, during this administration, coverage has increased by 21% up to the Affordable Care Act because the American Rescue Plan was passed. So when you hear people say ARP or the American Rescue Plan, these are federal resources that have increased the coverage for healthcare by 21%. The increase to 14.5 million people represents a 21% increase over 2021 due to the expansions of the American Rescue Plan. We are now also undergoing efforts, and I have voted for, and it has passed the House, to allow Medicare to directly negotiate prescription drug prices. There are more than 60 million people who are enrolled in that program, and we will talk about that briefly later. The Affordable Insulin Now Act has passed the House of Representatives, and I'm proud to have voted for a measure that will limit the cost of insulin to $35 a month for people. Now it has to pass the Senate. I'm sending you guys a message. Call your senators. These past 2 years have also shown us the importance of telehealth. I'm supportive of several bipartisan measures in Congress that would modernize Medicare's telehealth posture, including increasing access to telehealth services for all patients regardless of their geography. So since Mother's Day is right around the corner, this is a really good time to also remind you that Black Maternal Health Omnibus Act also was passed. It was led by my friend and Furlander's Representative Lauren Underwood. And this legislation directly addresses the efforts that are needed to improve maternal health among minority groups, among veterans, and vulnerable populations. So these are all really worthwhile efforts in healthcare, and I'm really glad to have been able to support them. However, I do recognize that there are ginormous concerns in our community right now with regards to healthcare, particularly emergency care in southern Chester County due to the closures of Brandywine and Jennersville's hospitals. And I'm very thankful to the work of the commissioners who are pictured here in the most goofy outfit I could come up with, to bring medical coverage back to Chester County. And I appreciate Chester County's hospital's expansion in their emergency department to include additional beds for our community members who are in need. So I want to acknowledge, I hope he's here tonight, Nick Torres, who heads the Health Coordinated Working Group. Hello, Nick. With the Alliance for Health Equity, which has been meeting regularly to address the needs of Chester County. It's community engagement like yours that makes our community so strong. I know that mental health is a huge concern that I hear about very consistently, not only the health of students, but of parents and other members of our community. And so just a couple months ago, Chester County was awarded $300,000 in federal American Rescue Plan funds to support a 988 hotline, which supports people with behavioral health crises 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So this is another reason why I was proud to support this bill, and I would encourage you to check the votes of others to bring resources to our community. And I want to thank and I want to acknowledge our state senator, Carolyn Committa, who is here tonight, who's working with state legislators directed federal funds to Chester County. Thank you, Carolyn, for your amazing collaboration on that. And I look forward to many, many, many more hundreds of thousands of dollars to come. And next to seniors, plowing through. In many cases, the greatest generation. I had intended my parents to be able to be here tonight. Unfortunately, they needed to go back to Washington, D.C. But seniors here in this audience and in our community are a part of that silent generation that I'm enormously grateful for. I promise you that I see you, that I hear you, and that I will continue to work on your behalf in Washington, D.C. and here in Pennsylvania. I am very much honored to have earned a Lifetime Achievement Score in my long life of 3 years, of 100 from the Alliance of Retired Americans for advocacy in COVID funding and vaccines, for protecting older workers from discrimination, from strengthening Social Security and Medicare, and from increasing health and safety assistance in our living homes. So I'm happy to announce that. I also led a letter to Dr. Kilalo Kajazi, the acting commissioner of the Social Security Administration, to urge the reopening of the Social Security Administration field offices. Many of our seniors, I see here a little guffaw there, prefer and need in-person access for their appointments, and we're frustrated by very long wait times on the phone and the inability to get correct information on websites. So I'm very pleased that our Social Security offices are making more in-person appointments available, and that the Social Security Administration has responded to that request. Constituent services are my top priority. Our offices are open, and I think all of our offices should be open too. Moving along. We're almost there. Well, kind of not. But we are moving right along. Here now to transition to global engagement, and an important topic to, I know, all of us, which is supporting our troops and to our veterans as well. I not only served myself, but my father and grandfather served, my brother did, and several of my cousins did as well, and I really take it personally I am the only Pennsylvanian on both sides of the aisle that serves on the Armed Services Committee, and I also am grateful to be able to serve on the Foreign Affairs Committee as well in the House of Representatives. I take this responsibility really, really seriously. So one of the best ways that I can help our service members, our uniformed service members, is through something that's called the National Defense Authorization Act, or the NDAA. This is one of the very few pieces of legislation that passes every single year. Goes through that whole entire School of Rock, kind of the Schoolhouse Rock thing, and gets to the President's desk for signature. So as a result, because I serve on the Armed Services Committee, a lot of the priorities that are important to us are able to get into that piece of legislation. So I'll go through a couple of them for you. One is the Military Moms Matter Act, which improves postpartum health care and including mental health and pelvic health evaluations. It also expands parental leave for 12 weeks for all of our service members in every one of our services. And this is something that was not across all services, not something that you could guarantee. I also fought to establish a pilot program that would help improve mental health appointment scheduling for appointments both on the military installations and also, importantly, outside in their communities. Because not everyone can get to or wants to get to a military installation, but everybody needs to make sure that they can access mental health resources within 24 hours. I've also co-sponsored critical legislation that helps our veterans make sure they can have timely veterans appointments, improve care and benefits for our veterans who are exposed to toxic substances, and to expand the work opportunity tax credit for spouses of our veterans. Having grown up with my mom being a Navy wife and my grandmother being a Navy wife, I just know how important it is to make sure that we're taking care of the whole family. And lastly, regarding our very own VA, I know that many of you, myself included, are very concerned about proposed changes to Codesville. And I've taken this up directly and pretty vociferously with our VA Secretary McDonough, and I recently held a listening session here in Codesville. I've extended an invitation to Mr. McDonough, Secretary McDonough, and I will continue to push for accessibility and quality care for our veterans. I believe he will take me up on the offer to come up here and take a look at what we have going on. And lastly, I would be remiss not to say that I really am proud of our community for our Valentine's for Vets program. If you haven't heard of it, please participate in it next Valentine's. We've delivered thousands of Valentines to our veterans, and I would love for you to participate in that with us. Next slide. Afghanistan. Again, global. After 20 years of bloodshed and American soldiers losing their lives, I think most of us thought it was time to end our presence in Afghanistan. But I did disagree with the approach that was taken by the Biden administration. Our rapid withdrawal left far too many behind. Vulnerable people at the mercy of the Taliban, including Afghani citizens who helped our troops. We have said for years that we would take care of these people who have served us. And when push came to shove, we didn't fully live up to our expectations and to our promises. Not to mention the millions of women and girls who have seen drastic improvements over the course of the 20 years in freedoms and access to education, who are now forced to abandon those dreams that we encouraged them to cultivate. Over the last 8 months, I've called on the Biden administration to evacuate Afghans who are now at risk solely due to the fact that they had decided to help American forces. I have repeatedly pushed for increased funding for humanitarian aid delivered by independent organizations instead of the Taliban to ensure that it is used for its intended purposes. And most recently, I signed a letter asking our president to pledge additional funds to UNICEF to quickly provide food aid to the millions of children in Afghanistan who are now facing starvation. While I know our eyes are very much on Ukraine, we need to make sure our eyes are still on this ongoing crisis too. Speaking of Ukraine, the going around the world at this point. On January 1st, I traveled to Belgium and to Ukraine on the part of a bipartisan congressional delegation with our Foreign Affairs Committee. I was able to meet with our NATO allies, with our European partners, and even President Zelensky and members of his defense cabinet, just weeks before Russia invaded, and that's me with President Zelensky. He's a lot shorter than he seems on TV. Watching the invasion unfold on television has been very difficult for me for many reasons. I do constantly think of the brave Ukrainians that I met there, and I hope that they are okay. And some of you know that it's also quite personal to me because my father was born in Lviv, which also can be pronounced a number of different ways depending on if you're Ukrainian or Polish or Russian or German. When it was actually Poland is when my father was born there. But defending democracies like Ukraine shouldn't be, is personal for all of us, not just for people who have connections to the area. So alongside many of my colleagues, I have voted over and over again and will continue to advocate for military and humanitarian funding for Ukraine. And I have consistently and bipartisanly ensured that we are sending additional weapons to Ukraine. When President Zelensky addressed members of Congress, as you can see here in this picture, you can actually also see that I'm sitting next to our senior Senator, Pennsylvania Senator Bob Casey to my left, but also importantly, a Republican senator from Louisiana to my right. I mention this because this picture is really symbolic of the broad bipartisan support that exists in Congress to support the people of Ukraine. And it is more commonly what you see in Congress than you see on the news. And that's why I sent a letter with other members of the Four Country Caucus, which I helped to found, to President Biden, asking for him to provide S-300s, which are long-range missiles, and anti-ship missiles to Ukraine to counter the Russian incursion and invasion. I also have led an effort with my fellow Air Force veteran, Representative Ted Lieu, to Secretaries Blinken and Austin, asking them to facilitate the transfer of S-300 weapon systems to Ukraine and backfilling NATO allies who possess these systems. Next slide, please, and our last one on Ukraine. All told, President Biden has authorized $2.21 billion in security assistance to Ukraine since January. And I will also tell you that when I sat in President Zelensky's office a few weeks before the invasion and asked all of us what he needed, I can honestly, emphatically tell you at that point he didn't know. So please listen to that, having come firsthand, first person, to what he thought he was needing. And he frankly was concerned that we were causing too much of a fuss. We were disturbing economic markets around the world, and we were scaring the Ukrainian people. So $2.2 billion in security assistance has been activated since the last several weeks. Here I am with Brian Fitzpatrick. Many of you might recognize him, Representative Fitzpatrick from the 1st Congressional District. I was one of the very first members of Congress alongside Representative Garabino, who is the co-signature of this letter, to publicly call for President Biden to suspend imports of Russian crude oil and petroleum products. And you can see that letter here. Simply put, we cannot fund Putin's war crimes. And obviously I know, and we all know, that the cost of energy and specifically petroleum products are top of mind for many of us. And I am very much looking forward to addressing this during our question and answer period. For these efforts and more, I was incredibly proud to very recently be sanctioned by the Kremlin itself. We are almost there, folks. Voting. What are we fighting for? We're fighting for democracies, right, around the world. We're fighting for that most sacred right, the right to vote. And we've witnessed firsthand recently how fragile and important democracies are. And in my lifetime, I've had the opportunity to raise my hand and sworn an oath multiple times to stand up for our country and to serve. I've done this, of course, while serving in the military, as an officer in the U.S. Air Force, and also now as a representative in Washington, D.C. So securing our elections while standing up for democracy at home and abroad is the bedrock of my personal service to our community, to this Commonwealth, and to our country. I'm so very, very proud of our participation here in this area. In 2020 elections, 80% of registered voters cast a ballot in our communities. Your voice is your vote, and I thank you for voting. And I say this to anyone who will listen. No matter what your party affiliation is or who you voted for, please vote. And remember that elections happen twice a year. One is coming up, I think, 4 weeks from today. I've supported several pieces of legislation that protect our elections and our voters. I'm a co-sponsor of H.R. 4, which is the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. And I also help, yep, that's definitely John Lewis is an absolute giant. I also introduced a piece of legislation called the Stop Supporting Foreign Interference in Our Democracy Act, which is fairly self-explanatory, which was passed as part of the For the People Act. Again, to talking about safety, let's move quickly through to Ida, talk about Ida. We talked about the safety and security of our democracy in our world. Now we're transitioning back home to the safety and security of our communities. Our community has encountered storms before, but we all know that none were quite like Hurricane Ida. On September 1st, we experienced torrential rain. Our community was the center of historic stream flooding and devastating floodwaters throughout all of Chester County and some of Berks. The hardest hit communities were right where we sit, and Downingtown, Pocopson, Coatesville, and Modena. So here I want to have everyone take a moment to understand what this picture is to the left that I'm showing you. This is taken by Rick Rotondo, and this shows the Phoenixville Fire Department extending its ladder to rescue a stranded motorist from the roof of their car. So to all of the first responders who are here in this room, many of whom who answered that call that night, and many of whom I had the privilege of meeting in days after that, I want us all to say thank you to you. Additionally, Oxford, which is the hometown of the Fort Pearson Noble Sioux, bore the wrath of Ida in the form of a highly destructive tornado. We banded together as community members and branches of state and local government, and while there very much are still repairs in process, we can report that $265 million of federal assistance was approved for Pennsylvanians' repairs and other disaster causes because of Ida. Moving along for my last breath on Ida, I encourage President Biden to approve Governor Wolf's request for public assistance, and I very much appreciate that this funding from FEMA is available to our local municipalities to repair roads and bridges and other places. These funds can also be used, and I want you to listen, for floodwater mitigation and to update our stormwater systems. So be creative. FEMA opened a disaster recovery center in Downingtown, and I had the opportunity to meet, I believe over here, with representatives, there you are, Carolyn, Committa, and I very much appreciate FEMA's assistance and presence in our community in a time of great need. More than $82.2 million in individual assistance grants was issued in this particular facility. Also, on the right-hand side, you see in Downingtown, a police station that I had the privilege of visiting with. Here I am with our law enforcement, where they saw 8 feet of standing water inside their facility. 213 requests for FEMA public assistance were made and approved, which is funding to state and local governments and certain types of nonprofit organizations to rebuild the necessary infrastructure following our president's presidential disaster declaration. We are 2 away from being home to all of those questions. Speaking of our safe communities and first responders, let's talk about that. As we have just alluded to, this has been a super challenging time for all of us. For many of us, it's been a very, very difficult couple of years, but it has been enormously difficult for our first responders. Our law enforcement officers, our firefighters, our emergency technicians have responded to crisis after crisis after crisis in our community. COVID, Hurricane Ida, the great need for ambulance services in our community due to the closures of hospitals, all have really stretched all of our first responders' capabilities, but they have continued to faithfully support us. I'm really grateful for their service, and I support President Biden's budget to increase funding for the 2nd year in a row for our first responders in this country. Again, please do join me in a round of applause for our police. Second to last, something that's called community project funding, and I want you guys to embrace this as a concept because it worked for the first time in a while this last year. What this is an open process, a transparent process that we run in our office where we solicit ideas from our community of things that need to happen in our community. We had lots and lots of submissions. We have an independent group of people who go through them for us and help us rank order them and help us submit them through the committee process. And last year, or the one that just concluded, I'm proud to say that 9 of the 10 projects that went through this process were awarded. And I hope that Adele Shade from Albright's College of Scientific Research is here. Is she here? Oh, yay! There you go. And Stephanie Miller from Chester County. I don't know if I saw Stephanie. Yeah, there you are. Excellent. Both of these organizations and others are the recipients of these community project funds, and their projects will be used for STEM and STEAM instruction in Berks County and for financial literacy centers in Chester County. So I'm really, really excited about these projects, and we just closed the next round as well, so hopefully there will be more to come. This time we were allowed to submit 15, so hopefully we will get all 15. And second to last, constituent services, which I'm sad to leave for second to last, because the individual is really first in our community. We lead by constituent services, we lead by the individual. We want to make sure that our ideas come from the individual. So constituent services is the heart of what it is that we do. And accountability and transparency are very, very important. So I am also proud to say that at the end of my very first year, I was awarded the Democracy Foundation's Accountability and Transparency Award in Government. And this is the first time a freshman office was awarded that. I am proud to have hosted more town halls than any other member of the Pennsylvania delegation. To that end, my team has also closed more than 4,000 cases during my time in office. We've returned more than $10 million to our community, largely in IRS and VA benefits and Social Security benefits, and that's quite a bit of money. To give you some perspective, I cost you about $1.3 million with all of our team, so to have returned to $10 million over the course of 3 years is a pretty good investment. Lastly, I would say I'm very encouraged that a lot of these agencies that we struggle so hard with are definitely looking to improve. And I will continue to push on them, for the IRS, for the USPS, for the VA, all of those folks who are working their darndest to make things happen for us, to get the support that they need to be able to modernize and improve their processes. This is something that you can't expect miracles from if you don't adequately fund. So I will continue to work on that. And if he's here now, Mr. James Morrow, I know I saw, is one example of our, there you are, sir, our IRS casework success, and I thank you so much for joining us tonight. And I will read from your words for our friendly and prompt services. We are grateful for your feedback, and we hope to have many more successful cases to solve for you all, and hopefully fewer and fewer to solve for you all. And lastly and finally, before we get to questions, I will conclude with something that is also very much top of mind, which is the importance of bipartisanship, civility, and decency, and I say that with a mom voice. As I said earlier, you know, our voice, your voice is your vote. And from my perspective, my vote is also my record. So I'm really, really happy to share with you my voting record because it is consistent and it is bipartisan. In the 116th Congress, I missed only 2 votes of a total of 954 votes. And that's the best record of anyone in Pennsylvania. We are a pragmatic, and as I call us, a purple community, which is why I work every single day to legislate with my Republican colleagues from the right and my Democratic colleagues from the left. Bipartisanship is a reflection of all of our values here in Chester County. So this graphic shows you that of the 360 bills that I've co-sponsored so far this Congress, 56 have been bipartisan, and of those 30 bills that I have led, 83 of them have been bipartisan. So additionally, I'm also, as I mentioned before, one of the co-founders of a group that's called For Country, and it's a group of veterans. It's an all-veteran caucus, and we're bipartisan, but we run the gamut of the ideological spectrum. We do not agree on much. But we do agree that this country is worth serving, and we do agree that we need to find the common ground. We do agree that country comes above party, and although we do disagree on policy issues, we're here with that common purpose, regardless of political affiliation or aspiration. And we will continue to work on things that matter. Many of them, if you follow your news source, you'll see For Country Caucus referenced, and that's what that group is. So that concludes our conversation, or my part of the conversation for tonight. We now get the opportunity to listen to the original Mayor Pete, who will hopefully deliver some really awesome questions that I will do my best to answer. I'm grateful for the chance to do that. I am running behind, but we'll do our best to. I'm good?
Absolutely.
I'm right on. Yes, okay.
We are right on.
Yeah, right on. So over to you, Mr. Urscheler, for your questions.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much to our representative, Houlahan, for her incredible. We'll jump right into your questions. If for some reason we don't get to your specific question this evening, I will be sending these home to Chrissy's office, and they will make sure to reach out to you individually. The first question we have is government spending is fueling inflation, which hurts seniors and the poor. What spending cuts would you advocate to help balance the budget?
Sure, and that's a really good question, and it also gets to the what I'm sure is on everybody's mind, which is inflation, right? And the fact that we have spent quite a bit of money recently to try to combat something that none of us have seen in our lifetime, and arguably very few people ever have seen, which is this pandemic. So let's drill down on that, because this has to do with all of the spending that we've just been talking about, right? I belong to a group that's called the New Dem Coalition, and the New Democratic Coalition is not something that I talked about here, but it is actually the largest ideological coalition in Congress, almost 100 members. And we, the New Dem Coalition, are very much about fiscal responsibility and very much about pro-business and pro-growth, and trying to make sure that we're responsible to the taxpayer dollar, but also making sure that we're thoughtful about how we're using them. And what I would say is we knew when we were heading into COVID that we had 2 paths to take, to choose your adventure, so to speak. One of those paths was to take the risk, see what happened. Another one of those paths was to work hard to make sure that the best outcome could happen. And after talking through the New Dem Coalition, through a group that I'm part of called the Problem Solvers, which is a bipartisan Republican and Democratic group, I became increasingly convinced that we needed very much during this time to not make a mistake and to do what I believe happened in 2007, 2008, which was not enough. I knew that that was what many economists decided was the outcome of 2000, 2008. And while I understood, and many of us did, that what we were doing to respond to COVID might heat the economy up, which it has, it was much, much better outcome than what we were seeing, which was another recession or another depression, a great, great, great depression. So as a result of the work that we've done that I've hopefully outlined to you, whether it was the CARES Act or the American Rescue Plan or the Infrastructure Act, or all of those kinds of things, I hope that what we've done is that we've put ourselves on a track to recover our economy, which I addressed in terms of our jobs growth and return to jobs. We also have had an increase in wage. But I think what we were trying to do is attack the beast at both ends. One was the first thing that we needed to do in spending our resources was to make sure that we were addressing the root cause, which was COVID. And as I went through all of those different things to get needles into arms and to get shots developed and schools opened and businesses open and that sort of thing, I hope that those things created the opportunity for our economy to at least have the chance to survive. And I think we saw through that layering on of things, we have survived, and that's good. And in fact, in some cases, we have thrived. I also know that I worked really hard to make sure that once we saw that things were heating up a little bit, that we put on the brakes as best as we can. This is going to take some time on all of our behalves. And that means that for instance, I talked to the president and his staff members and said, listen, at this point, I really need us to think about the fact that it is very unaffordable to pay $4 for gas. It is hard to make decisions between groceries and gas. And we need to think about how we're going to tamp that down. There are a few things that a member of Congress can do to that end, but some things that a member of Congress can do to pressure the places that can. And so as an example, releasing of the oil supplies, I mentioned that was something that was important. I also mentioned that we were talking to the actually I forgot to mention that we were talking to the administration about making the ports more effective and running them 24 hours a day so that we could release the tensions on the supply chains. So those are the things that we have done to begin to address this issue of inflation, which I think drives this question of how we are spending money and when we will begin to not spend quite as much money. And that drives the next part of this answer, which is what will we still do? What can we still do to release the pressure on inflation and growth of the cost of things to do in our economy? One is the Competes Act, which I mentioned. I hope that piece of legislation will help us because it will bring more jobs back to the country, will loosen our supply chain dependence on places like China, will allow us to be able to manufacture things like chips here, and as a result will lower prices, will ease our constraints on the supply chain. I also hope that we'll frankly be able to push forward legislation that helps us put more of us back into the workforce. One of the pressures on our economy is the fact that we don't have enough of us back at work. So we have issues with childcare, we have issues with living wage. I hope that those pieces of legislation will still come out of this existing Congress right now, and I have some hope to believe that they will. I also hope that between now and the end of this calendar year, that we will be able to move forward legislation that will reduce prescription drug pricing. And when we talk about, and I think that's really worth emphasizing, and when we talk about our pocketbook issues, inflation, if we reduce the amount of money that collectively we're spending on drugs, prescription drugs, we are putting more money into our pockets, and also interestingly enough, we are saving the government $1 trillion as well. So that will reduce the government deficit by $1 trillion if we're able to reduce the cost of prescription drugs to us. So it's a win-win situation in that area, and I have some hope, and call your senators, that could possibly happen between now and the end of the year. What can you do to help me with all of this? And I will get and finish it, hopefully wrap this up. Listen to what I'm trying to say here. There's a lot of action happening in the House, a lot of good ideas, and some of them are big and beautiful and hairy, and some of them need to be broken down into smaller bite-sized chunks. But we need to push those really good ideas through the Senate, and I need your help to make those priorities known to our senators, Democrats and Republicans. I'll give you a final example, which is there's something called the Farm Workforce Modernization Act. And for those of us in the farming community, you know that we've now passed that bill twice. This would relieve the pressure on our labor and workforce in our farming communities. It's passed with more than 36 Republican votes in the House. That means it's super bipartisan, and it has not been picked up in the Senate. So this is something that if we're paying attention, helps relieve all of the pressure on the economy that we're experiencing right now, helps deliver more dollars into the revenue of our economy, and helps us reduce debts and deficits. Lastly, what I will say is I'm aware that this is unique and unusual times, and I am aware that we need to be conscious of where we're putting our dollars and that they need to be responsibly spent. That being said, I want to make sure that you are aware that I'm doing my best with every decision to try to figure out where those resources are going and why they're being spent, all in a cause to try to return us to a sense of prosperity here in the country.
Thank you. Our next question is in regards to affordable housing here in the 6th Congressional District, and what also can counties and municipal governments do?
Yeah, and that's a really good question. I would encourage you to look at the aspects of what is now no longer called, but was the Build Back Better bill. That did have a lot of affordable housing resources in it at the federal level, but I also would encourage you to look at what we did pass and what is law, which is the infrastructure bill. The infrastructure bill does a lot to try to find ways that people can live where they work and also live near hubs where their transportation is. So it not only is better for the environment that we have more trains, or buses, but it also is better for workers that they're able to commute to jobs that exist within their communities. Here in this community, it's very, very expensive to live, as we all don't need to be told. We have something like, I believe it's 300 people who are in search of affordable housing and more after the hurricane, as I recall. And we need as many as 30 more affordable housing units of large enough scale to be able to address that. And so some of the resources that are in the infrastructure bill, and hopefully some that might be in what resides in what used to be the Build Back Better, can help there. But a lot of the stuff that's going on at the state and local level also can help. And we are working in tandem with one another to try to be creative with how the federal government is working and how the state government is responding to that. We do have an issue here in Chester County. It's expensive to live here, and we have lots and lots of jobs and opportunities that we need to address. I visited a truck factory in Morgantown that had more than 100 jobs available at more than $20 an hour with benefits. People couldn't get to those jobs, especially during COVID when they couldn't commute in carpools together because there weren't any trains or buses to get to them. I visited a chocolate factory that was similarly, under duress because they were paying really good wages with benefits, but they couldn't find enough workers because it was just too expensive to live in our area. So these are the things that we have to worry about to make sure that we're thriving.
The next set of questions are specifically about voting and election laws. First part of the question is making Election Day into a holiday. Second part is congressional term limits.
Sure. So some of that was in the HR 1, which was the For the People Act, which I voted for twice. That's a pretty big bill. And to be honest with you, I would like to see parts of that bill broken down to smaller pieces, as I've said, that we can all agree on. As an example, it did have in it making voting a day that we can take off or vote on so that we can all have the opportunity to vote. My brother is a surgical nurse. He works in Iowa. As I mentioned, he's also a vet of the Army. His commute is more than an hour to work. He works 12-hour shifts and then it's an hour back home. There's no way he can make it on time, to vote. And we need to find ways, not only through a holiday, but also through extended voting hours for people like my brother to be able to exercise his fundamental right to vote. And so I will continue to be working on those issues and hoping that we can break out pieces. If you're watching the news, you know that Senator Manchin, who seems to be one of those guys, in addition to the 10 or so other Republican senators who voted for the Voting Rights Act in the beginning, who has not allowed us to loosen that thing up. I hope that they collectively find their humanity. And I hope that we're able to move forward on those kinds of pieces of legislation. In terms of term limits, we have term limits right now, they're elections. And I think it's really important that you understand that this is a job that happens every single day. I am here to serve, and I am hopeful that you see how hard that I am working to serve us all.
Thank you so much. Our next question is specifically on your position regarding the student loan debt crisis and how can we make the rules a little more clear?
Yeah, I think that this is a fair question, and what I tried to articulate to you all in the beginning of my conversation was just how I see it. I mentioned to you guys that I'm an ROTC recipient, scholarship recipient, and I would like to see very much the model of what we do in our economy, model that to some degree. To give you some more detail on that, I was 16, 17, I was awarded a scholarship specifically in industrial engineering. I was told that I would get my tuition paid for if I returned service and also if I majored in industrial engineering, because my community needed industrial engineers in the Air Force. And so I want to see that we are encouraging people whom we are allocating our taxpaying resources to, doing things that our economy is looking for. We have a vibrant economy, but we're not matching the skills with the people. And so that would be one kind of start, and that's why I've been such an advocate for this service debt relief, because I really want us to encourage people to seek jobs that we need in our economy. One such job that we really desperately need is counselors, particularly counselors for young people. We don't have enough people who are going into that particular field. People who go into that particular field tend to go and work, if they can, with an older population because it frankly pays better. But the debt that you accrue to be in that particular field is something that I'd like to see us be more responsive to, because we know it's coming, right? We know that people are retiring out of those fields and and we need to be priming the pump more. So there's lots of legislation that talks about that. I don't want to see our government making huge money off of our kids and those people who take out loans. But I do want to make sure that people have some skin in the game because I really think that makes a huge difference.
Thank you. Our next set of questions is specifically about the climate crisis. What can be done and what are you doing?
Yeah, it's huge, right? It's literally existential. And what I hope is that even in my time, short time in the Congress, I have heard people change their words, their vocabulary. I serve, as I mentioned, on the Armed Services Committee, and it is one of the most bipartisan committees in terms of the fact that we get things done. But we also are very divided in the communities that we represent. But I've heard in the language and vocabulary of my colleagues changes in the ways they talk about the planet and its health. I know it's not enough and I know it's not fast enough, but it's good. It's good to hear that just in a couple of years that I've been sitting in those seats that I've heard that pivot and that change. And what I can also say is, importantly, in those seats, in the armed services seats, the United States government, the United States military is one of the biggest users of energy. Right? If not the biggest user of gas and oil and those kinds of things. And the fact that our chairman right now, Chairman Smith, represents Washington State and one of the bluer communities in the country is a good thing, because he's been able to push the agenda, and frankly the Pentagon has been pushing right along with him, because we need to build a resilient military that is independent of resources that we can't get ourselves and that take care of the planet. I did field training or boot camp at Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida. Tyndall Air Force Base in Florida got blown off the map a few years ago by a hurricane. And the conversation is, do we rebuild it? Why would we rebuild it? Where would we rebuild it instead? Because it's just going to happen again. So the other conversation is, how do we make it so that it doesn't happen again? And that's really one of the powerful things about the defense budget and this Defense Authorization Act is I get to lean into that. I get to help legislate in that. So as an example, I put in some legislation about PFAS, and that's a fire retardant that is very, very dangerous and gets into our water systems, particularly in communities that can't really help it. And we are working really hard to address the issue of PFAS through the NDAA, recognizing that will help other communities outside of the defense industry. So these are the things that we talk about every day. It's a ginormous problem, and I am hopeful that there is bipartisan movement. I'll leave it with, I also got the opportunity to go to COP26, which is the annual planet conference, for lack of a better word. I always think of the rescuers, the little mice on your movie. I don't know if you watched that, where they march into the United Nations. And I went on a bipartisan delegation with Republicans. That's the first time that Republicans have gone constructively, not to destruct or to, obstruct. So that's great, even though it's not fast enough. Yeah, it is great. And I will go again with them.
Thank you so much. What can be done to reform the National Flood Insurance Program to make it more affordable?
Yeah, I don't know enough about this, so I will plead not enough information on this and try to get back to you with information. But what I will talk to you about is, I was really struck by what happened with Ida. And the fact that we had innovated this PPP program, right? Paycheck Protection Program didn't exist before COVID. There was no such thing. But we were able to stand up, albeit with some inefficiencies and hiccups and that sort of thing, a ginormous, really inspired revolution in how we are directing resources to our smallest of businesses. And I was really struck when Ida hit that didn't exist in the world of emergencies, federal disaster emergencies. And I thought that here was a solution, that already existed, and we had just stood it up, that might have another application for the inevitability of more disasters, like flooding, like Hurricane Ida. And so I've been working, again, across the aisle, and also with my Chairwoman Velasquez on the Small Business Committee, to see if there's an idea there, right? I've also been working with our commercial bankers and lenders and federal credit unions and those kinds of things to say, is there some way that we can transform PPP to also be able to be used in these flooding situations like Ida? And if we are able to do that, are we able to have them be forgiven if we find a way to make them not likely to happen again? So I won't pretend to be an expert on flood insurance or floods, but that's kind of one of the things that we're banging around in Congress right now.
Thank you. Can you give us your position on the current border policy?
Sure. I am, as I mentioned, the daughter of a refugee. My dad came here when he was less than 5 years old, having survived with his mom and his grandmother the Holocaust. I am enormously grateful for this nation and the gifts that it has given all of us. So I believe that this is a place that is not full. I believe that this is a place that needs this story to happen over and over and over again. One generation later, I am standing in front of you as a member of Congress, and my father was a literal refugee when he was 4 years old. So I want to make sure that we find ways to create the opportunities for more 4 and 5-year-old little boys to come to this country with their moms, and for people like him to be able to succeed in our society. I want to be able to find more and my grandmother too. I want to be able to find more opportunities for people to be able to come here with high skills that we really need here in this economy. Chester County, I can't tell you the number of times that I've visited businesses that are really working hard to keep employees and to find highly skilled employees, and have done everything they can to find them within our borders, so to speak, and they're looking for ways that we can create opportunities for people to come from other places to be able to help us with our workforce needs, whether they're permanent or whether they're temporary. So I believe that there is a need here. I believe that we have the heart here. I also believe that we need the will here in Congress to be able to generate solutions that are common sense and collaborative and bipartisan. And I think what we have now is, I had the opportunity to visit the border about, 2 years ago or so, a really dysfunctional system that's going on where we have many, many silos of people who are trying to do the right thing, but they're trying to do the right thing with the mandates that they've been given and the resources that they've been given. So I believe that we have an opportunity to help make people be able to be welcomed here, but welcomed here in an appropriate way. So I think there are solutions there. In fact, there was a piece of legislation that was not available when I came into Congress, but that was bipartisanly supported by Representative Aguilar and Representative Will Hurd, a Democrat and a Republican, that really had some beautiful ideas in it. And we've been on the verge of creating these pathways for quite some time. But we've never had the appetite to do this politically. And one of the things that makes that hard is that we are kind of constantly being told the next election is only 6 months away, the next election is only 6 months away. And so we need the grace to be able to collaborate with each other and understand that this isn't about elections. You know, this is about the future of the American people, and we need to get together and figure out how to fix it.
And I'm going to try to save this last little one in.
Okay.
But we have a young person in the audience who is interested in being a senator one day, and they would like to know how old they need to be a summer intern in your office.
Well, whoever you are, thank you for coming. You are much more engaged in this process than I ever was at your age, whoever you are. And shame on me, and thank you to you. I am going to ask Sue that question because I probably will say, come on down, but she'll probably say, I think 18, that's what I thought it was. You need to be 18. We have ample and abundant opportunities to work in our offices, both here. We have 3 offices, 2 in our community, 1 in Westchester next to the Boston Market, 1 up in Reading at City Hall, and 1 down in Washington, D.C., and we welcome you. And Sue over there is your person on the street to be able to help with that. She is my daughter. So please do. Please, we really need you.
Thank
And
you.
think twice about being a senator. I don't know.
And that concludes our question and answers.
And now I will read the other note that I wrote for myself, which was again, smile and breathe, because we've made it together. I am relatively speaking on time. If it's okay with you guys, I'd like to give you a couple of closing remarks and thoughts. I want to thank you, Peter, for moderating this event again. And I want, of course, to thank our audience for your rapt attention and participation. And I want to thank Brian, Ashley, Drew, and Janice for hosting us here today in this amazing place. And of course, the Phoenixville Police Department once again for your continued service, not just tonight, but for all other 364 days of our year. Our 16th president, as you might remember, was Abraham Lincoln. And he once said, the legitimate object of government is to do for a community of people whatever they need to have done but cannot do in their separate and individual capacities. I think that's a really good encapsulation of what government is about. We may not always agree on the role of government, but we may not always agree, and we may not always agree on the policies that the majority of us will vote for, or the orders issued by the president. But we must agree on the purpose of our government, by and for the people. And we should agree that our conduct must remain civil and decent to one another. It's really honestly the honor of my life to represent us in Pennsylvania. And as I said in opening remarks, there really is no perfect piece of legislation. So I can tell you this though, that with every single vote, I get 2 choices, yes or no. And I do my best to cast my ballot with all of you in mind and with the best information that I have available. As many of you all know, that I taught chemistry for a period of time, and I was also the chief operating officer of a literacy-based nonprofit focused in making sure that our kids can read by 4th grade. Unabashedly, I am a fan of books. And growing up, one of my favorite series of books, if you're of a certain age, you can tell me this was a good one, was Choose Your Own Adventure. These books placed the reader in the role of the protagonist, and the reader was presented with a set of circumstances and choices, and at the end of every page or so, you had to make a choice. The goal was really simple. The goal was to survive. My goal for all of us, is not just to survive our choices that we have at our hand, but to thrive instead. These past several years have been incredibly challenging, and there's really no doubt about it and no other way to explain it. At home, we've had to make some really, really hard choices. We've made some very hard choices in Congress. It's my belief that our best days are very much ahead of us, and we will not just survive, but we will indeed thrive. So I'll leave you guys this evening with a couple of sections of Amanda Gorman's remarkable poem, The Hill We Climb. And so we lift our gazes, not to what stands between us, but what stands before us. We close the divide because we know to put our future first, we must put our differences aside. A country that is bruised but whole, benevolent but bold, fierce and free. We will not be turned around or interrupted by intimidation, because we know our inaction and inertia will be the inheritance of the next generation. For there is always light if we are only brave enough to see it, if we are only brave enough to be it. So with that, I will say, please continue to take good care of one another and be well. And thank you very much. I hope to see you around our community, and please have a good night.